to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, February 3rd, 2015. Getting into the week here. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. John is sitting in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Very busy news day. The stock market is soaring. We'll be talking about that a little bit further in the show. And, of course, obviously, the corporate media is reporting on absolutely nothing except this Jordanian pilot who was supposedly burned alive by evil ISIS. And there are always reasons to doubt that. But everybody's hopping on board. In fact, Hawaii's Representative Gabbard is on Fox News right now saying, "Oh, they're evil people. They're terrible people. We can never understand them." And they're just trying to get this war agenda going again. And I don't think they're getting a lot of traction because we've been lied to so many times. Nobody is going to take anything coming out of the corporate media or the government at face value, especially since this video is once again provided by Site Intelligence Group and Rita Katz, who we know are tangled up with CIA and Israeli intelligence. So, anyway, news that is going on that is not being reported here in the United States. There is a major protest surrounding the Ukrainian president's office in Kiev. And there was a little bit of a confrontation, but as of the last time I checked Russia Today's live streaming feed, it's peaceful. They just want to have their say. The European media is already trying to spin that this is Maidan who are angry that Poroshenko has not, just come down hard on the eastern Ukrainian republics. And, of course, that's not what it is at all. The western Ukrainians are sick and tired of war. They're sick and tired of austerity. They're tired of their children being conscripted and sent off to die against battle-hardened troops. But if this thing really gets going, Kiev could turn into another Yemen-like disaster. Meanwhile, in response to Poroshenko's fourth mobilization, the eastern Ukrainian rebels are announcing a new recruiting drive. They're planning 5 new brigades, 3 of which will be motorized. Artillery and tanks, they're just capturing a lot of this stuff left and right here. And, according to the Lugansk People's Republic, they have shot down a Ukrainian Air Force plane, a Sukhoi 25, and they're now searching for the pilot. I hope it's the guy who shot down Flight 17. That would be really good video to get on the media. And here's an interesting story. U.S. training of Ukrainian military underway in Kiev. We have forces, our trainers and advisors already in Kiev. They're being directed supposedly from NATO headquarters and the U.S. Embassy in Kiev. Well, you don't need to direct trainers. You direct combat troops. And we already know there are U.S. mercenaries on the ground, British mercenaries on the ground. We're seeing videos of some of the Kiev forces wearing identifiable U.S. military patches. They're just trying to move from the covert to the overt. And they're talking about, we have to give Kiev lethal weapons. Well, they've already been doing that. Remember at the Donetsk airport, when that was all over, they found U.S. manufactured weapons on the ground, left by the Kiev forces. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a quick phone call here. Steve in California, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, economics. When we see the markets going up one day 300 and the next day down 300, and you were talking about the Fed's kind of massaging it, getting it up that way. Is this done by that quantitative easing you were talking about earlier?
Well, certainly the funds to do these buy-ins to manipulate the market are coming from the Federal Reserve. Whether it's accounted as part of QE or not, we don't know. The Federal Reserve continues to be very secretive about what's going on. If you'll remember back in 2009, where they were literally loaning trillions out through the discount window, and they weren't going to say who was getting that cash injection. And so this is going to be more of the same. And, they're trying to say that the rallying stock market is because there may be a deal with the Greek debt situation, which I think is a pure fantasy. And I'll tell you one thing. Anybody who knows ahead of time when the PPT is going to come in and drive that market up and let it go down again, they can make a fortune from these wild dynamic swings on the market. But this soaring market today doesn't make any sense. I don't care what they're talking about in Greece. All of the major U.S. corporations, especially retail, missed their earnings forecasts. We've got massive layoffs all over the place. Radio Shack is about to vanish into thin air. It doesn't make sense that there would be a stock market soaring like this when all the economic indicators are this bad. So it has to be manipulated.
I totally agree. I always love what your little line is saying, look what should be there and it isn't. And you were talking about the Baltic Dry Index. We talk about that quite a bit. But again, down today, 577. And these barges are not leaving their port. They're not coming in. I live near San Francisco, and the bay had one barge sitting out there, and it's amazing. They're just not lining up like they used to.
Yeah, well, we've got a bunch of cargo ships just riding at anchor off the coast of Oahu here, which I guess if you don't have anything to do, Hawaii's a nice place for you to put into port and let your crew have some fun. I mean, March of last year, the Baltic Dry Index was about 1,600, and now it's down to 575. I heard one report that it had actually gone down to 540.
Yeah. Hey, one last question. I got an email, something about the government, talking about telecommunications companies looking at Cuba, eyeing Cuba for future business. I mean, then I did some research to find out, what do the citizens of Cuba, what kind of incomes do they have? And it's quite amazing. $20 for state workers a month, $20 a month for state workers. The doctors and the nurses got a pay increase. Some are making as much as $67 a month. So keeping that all in mind, they evidently don't have the financial resources to be looking for high tech. So
well, that's not entirely true. They do have internet service in Cuba. It's not as fast as here in the United States of America. But you need to remember when they talk about, they're only making $20 a month. Well, in Cuba, the cost of living is a tiny fraction of what it is here in the United States of America. And that $20 equivalent goes a lot further than it would here in the United States of America. And these large multinational corporations, when they go into another country, they're going to charge what they think the public can afford to pay for their product. And in a lot of other countries, products that you're paying $100, $200, $300 for are being sold for the equivalent of $50, $60 over there because that's what the market will bear. The price of a product has very little to do with its actual cost of manufacture. It's always trying to figure out what people will be willing to pay for XYZ and charging them for that. A good example would be pharmaceuticals. We know how incredibly expensive prescription medications are in the United States. They're much less expensive in other countries, and those countries and the United States are buying the pills from the same factories in Asia.
Yeah, but Michael, I can't see how, like the auto industry or the computer industry would sell something way below cost just to get it out there. I mean, we're talking about, how much of a loss. How much is the markup? I guess you have to look at the markup of some of these items and what their cost is, and they're surely not going to sell it or give it away. I just can't see that happening.
Yeah, but at the same time, if Cuba is opening up, their tourism is going to spark. They're going to be exporting rum and cigars and agricultural produce to the U.S. So if this really moves forward, and there are so many people trying to sabotage it, the standard of living in Cuba and their earning ability is going to go up to the point where they can start affording some of these items. But there are computers down in Cuba. There is internet. It's not particularly fast, but it is there. And so there is a market.
Okay. Thanks, Michael.
All right. We're going to let you go here. Yeah, when somebody says, the people in this other country, they're only making 1/3 of what Americans are making here today, and it sounds really impressive for America until you realize that in those other countries, the cost of living is much lower. They're not paying anywhere near as much in taxes. They're not being forced on Obamacare and all the other things that we're being told we must buy and use, like vaccines. All right, we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And the corporate media is just nonstop on this Jordanian pilot. And apparently Obama made a few comments out there about, how terrible and unreasonable. And yes, it is. It's set up to provoke a reaction of horror. But remember, we're talking about Barack Obama, the president who has admitted that the United States government tortured innocent people to death to find weapons of mass destruction that never existed. And how about all those drone strikes into those other countries that would kill 20, 30 innocent bystanders for every one suspect who never had their day in court. A drone strike is not a clean, painless death. Those people also burned to death. Now, this Jordanian pilot, when you are a military pilot, you have to accept the risk. You could get shot down in enemy territory, and they're not going to be very cheerful about you. But this whole thing was staged measure. Even describing it was professionally produced video with cuts and edits. It's a theater production to try and provoke rage and anger in the American people so that they will fling their sons and daughters onto the ISIS bayonets. Except that ISIS appears to be, like Al-Qaeda, a U.S. manufactured front group to get the war going. Iran wouldn't do anything provocative. Syria wouldn't do anything provocative. So create your own provocation, send them in there and say, we've got to get the evil ISIS. It's a fraud. It's as fake as the torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin. It is as fake as the Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. It is as fake as Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. Our government believes in the policy, if at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again, because they don't know any other way to go about their business. We're looking at a multi-generational government that has gotten by with lies, fraud, and deception. They absolutely don't know any other way to get what they want. Meanwhile, over in Russia, Russian troops are starting to hold drills on the anti-air missile system, the S-300, in the Kaliningrad region. Putin understands what's going on. The U.S. is now gunning for Russia. Actually, for the ruble. That's what these wars are all about. You will use the U.S. dollar for all global trade and banking. Mahi dictum est. And it really is a nonsensical idea. Now, at the end of World War II, when the Bretton Woods meeting was held, it made sense to have a single global currency because back then, accounts were still being settled, if not for bullion, physical coins and bars, for boxes of paper notes. But that was then. And today, in a world of instantaneous global financial transactions, the idea of needing a single global currency is completely obsolete. But the U.S. financial system makes a huge profit off of everybody having to come to the U.S. to get dollars to do trade, and they don't want to give that up. Because without it, they're going to fall apart. They got lazy. And over the last 30 years, they've allowed American manufacturing to decline both in volume and quality, and nobody wants our GMO agriculture. And that's what's got them in this corner. And always remember what Senator Hiram Johnson said. Truth is the first casualty of war. And that's what's going on the corporate media right now. They're murdering truth to trick you into another war, as they have done so many times before. Now, interesting little article over at Ex Republic TV, and it's talking about an interview that took place over at the Atlantic, and the reporter was Conor Friedersdorf, interviewing Michael Hayden, the former CIA and NSA director, who came right out and said September 11th gives us permission to reinterpret the Bill of Rights. Specifically the Fourth Amendment. That was Hayden's entire justification for all the NSA, CIA spying on all of you is 9/11 allows me to reinterpret the Fourth Amendment. No, it doesn't. That Constitution does not belong to the government of the United States of America. Look up on top in the extra large lettering, we the people. It's our Constitution that is a binding contract on the government as to what it may and, most importantly, may not do. And no, you don't get to reinterpret it. If you really feel that Fourth Amendment needs to be changed, there is a process in the Constitution called adding another amendment voted through by Congress, signed by the President, and ratified by 3/4 of the states. And that is the only allowable method to alter the Constitution. But we seem to see this idea percolate through our entire federal dictatorship, that the Constitution is fluid, it is adjustable. We may change it at will to suit whatever our current ideology happens to be. Now, up in New York, there's been a huge brouhaha over this new strategic response unit they're putting together. This is a group of 300 officers who will be equipped with body armor, fully automatic machine guns, armored vehicles, tear gas, rubber bullets, all of the weapons of civil mayhem. And it was originally announced that they were going to be deployed, obviously, in case of a terror attack, but also against protest groups. Well, this provoked a huge response as to why peaceful protesters needed to have, armed police wagging machine guns at them as a form of intimidation. So the New York Police Department backed off and said, well, actually, no, we're not going to use them against protesters. That has now reversed again. The New York Police Department commissioner is out there saying, yes, these units will be deployed against protesters, and get this, because terrorism and protests are roughly the same. Now, years ago, when this whole anti-terror thing got going, and they said, we need special laws to deal with terror, and everybody said, oh, yes, we're going to go along with that. And I predicted back then that once you started allowing the government to escape the Constitution in cases of terrorism, the definition of what constitutes terrorism would start to change to encompass legal, constitutionally protected activities. And here it is. The New York City Police Department commissioner thinks terrorism and protests are roughly the same thing. Getting completely out of control. I don't recognize this country anymore. I really do not recognize this country any longer here. All right, so let's get on to this thing about ISIS said to have burned the captive Jordanian pilot to death, and Jordan is already saying they're going to immediately execute the 6 ISIS prisoners they have, including the female suicide bomber, who obviously isn't very good at her job. And it just feels like propaganda to me. Now, I have not seen the video, either online or on the corporate media. Fox News has been describing it. Oh, he is doing this and he's doing that and interruption. And I was listening to that description and all I could think of was Dan Rather describing the Zapruder film to all of America following the Kennedy assassination. Couldn't show it. Too shocking. Rather described it. And then years later we found out Rather's description was completely bogus. More about this when we come back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about this latest desperate and pathetic effort to whip America up into a war fever. After all the years of war we've already had to suffer through and lose our children to and our money. And even the New York Times is acknowledging this latest video came from the Site Intelligence Group. That's Rita Katz's operation. Now, Rita Katz is tied in with Israeli intelligence. In fact, her father was executed as an Israeli spy. And they have been caught in the past faking videos. So if it's coming from Site Intelligence, that's strike one against it. Now, to be honest, I have not seen the video online or on the media. It's been described to us over and over, especially on Fox News. And as I said, this reminded me of all those years ago following the Kennedy assassination, where Dan Rather, who was this small, unknown newscaster at a small market Texas station, got on the air and told everybody that he'd seen the Zapruder film and it showed Kennedy's head rocketing forward from the gunshot from the school book depository. And Rather was immediately catapulted to network news superstardom and has never really explained his lapse because obviously when Jim Garrison got the Zapruder film, it was discovered that Rather was wrong. Kennedy's head moves back. And it wasn't just Rather who was embarrassed by that because I think it was one of the big glossy magazines like Life. I don't remember if it was Life or not. They were exposed for having printed the frames of the Zapruder film out of sequence to support the official story of a gunshot from the rear. So be very careful when we can't show you the film, it's too shocking, but we'll tell you all about it. It's one more reason to doubt what's going on. Now, there is an image from the video that's being tweeted all over the place, and we have a copy of it on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. And I have 2 problems with that image. First, our victim is just standing there in the middle of the cage on fire. There are areas to the left that clearly don't have flame. Now, if you're on fire, you're not thinking rationally or symbolically. You're just saying, ow, I need to get away from this, and we're not seeing that reaction. Second, the fire that's on the ground around the cage is generating a large volume of black smoke. But the fire that's overlaid on the figure in the cage, there's no smoke associated with it. Now, without high-resolution images or the actual video, it really is impossible to state, but I know as a former visual effects professional, these things are very easy to fake. And they're already acknowledging this is a professional quality video production that they are showing to us. But even if this is real, even if they burned up this guy, we don't know who did it. Only who we're being told we're to think did it by the same government that assured you that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons of mass destruction. We're going to grab a phone call here. Steve in Ontario. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, touching on the video fakery part, you were talking about Kennedy, and you had a video that you recommended, documentary. It was about 3.5 hours long. It was JFK to 9/11, A Rich Man's Trick.
Yes.
Absolutely amazing documentary.
Yes, it is.
But speaking of the Zapruder film, isn't it amazing? Like, I've researched JFK and looked into it enough, not my life's journey or anything like that. But for the first time ever in that documentary, it showed how even the Zapruder film had been edited to take out the spot where the car almost comes to a complete stop, so the gunman from the the drainage area can take his shot. The Zapruder film, actually, they edit out the quick stop, but yet the camera angle from the other side shows where the motorcycles almost ran into the back of JFK's car because the driver of JFK's car came to a sudden quick stop to let the shooter get a clean shot at JFK. Do you remember that part?
I remember that part of it. Now, the Zapruder film cuts were supposedly because the film lab damaged it during processing. And if you believe that one, I got some of Saddam Hussein's nuclear weapons to sell you. There were other movies being shot, but they were all taken by the government and never seen again. Film from all the cameras that were around there. Only a few pictures were allowed out, as long as they could be implied to say that they supported the official story. They obviously couldn't disappear all the film and video and cameras from Dealey Plaza without making it look obvious that, yeah, there's some kind of a cover-up going on there. So they had to be very, very selective about that. But the cuts in the Zapruder film, they were attributed to an accident that happened during the processing, very conveniently at the right locations. Apparently, one of the cuts takes place where it would have shown bullet holes in that traffic sign that they were passing by. That's one of the more obvious cuts there. But we all know, looking back, we all know that was another cover-up by the U.S. government. That's what they do. That's all that they do. Lies, fraud, and deception. It's the American way.
You know, it's fascinating that every time you turn around, you can, once you're aware of the tricks and the fraud and the propaganda, everything you see now, you see in a different light. I very rarely watch national television in Canada here or, even local news. Our local news station here is nothing but a propaganda arm for, whatever government they're serving. It is the most amazing thing. Once you're really aware of it and you're awake to the whole lie of everything, you realize that everything is lies, except like a car crash, or unless you see it yourself, you have to doubt that nowadays. But I mean, literally everything is just fraud and lies. It's incredible.
Yeah, or it's paid advertising. Like this measles scare campaign that's trying to sell vaccines to everybody. When propaganda only works if people don't understand they're being propagandized. And it used to be illegal in the United States, but unfortunately one of the more recent National Defense Authorization Acts rescinded the laws that made it a crime for the government to use propaganda on the American people. But I remember when Kennedy was killed, and I guess I had the instincts of an archivist back then, because I saved everything that came out, and I had a big box of it. And then years later, when Jim Garrison's case came out against Clay Shaw, I went back and really looked at that stuff, and I immediately spotted the obvious signs of fraud. Oswald standing at the ground level as Kennedy grabs his throat. the shot that was set up to prove one bullet could hit both Kennedy and Connolly, and it's obviously not taken from the school book depository. You can go to my JFK page at my website and see all that stuff. But once you understand the government and the media do lie, not occasionally, but all the time, yeah, the lies become very obvious because they're not really designed to survive a careful analysis. They're just there to give people who don't want to think about things an excuse not to.
Yeah, we live in a world of headlines, and that's it. And that's all people care about or look at is they read the headlines and then they move on. And it is the reading deeper into the story. Quite honestly, some of the journalism does reveal the truth further down in the story, but you have to disseminate it and read a little bit further on. But
yeah.
It's all headlines, and, you know, the stuff that comes over the mainstream radio or news, I mean, if all you hear is a headline, and then you get out of your car and don't hear the rest of the story, they've planted that seed, and then when you go to talk to somebody in a rational conversation, they go, oh, no, that isn't what I heard, and now all of a sudden when you just try and bring up a topic, they've got automatically the wrong information implanted in their head because all they heard was the headline.
Yeah, that happens an awful lot. And content producers do understand. They're going to get that first soundbite or that first headline, and that is going to set the tone of what it is they believe. Steve, we got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, Ron Paul has gone public slamming the U.S. drone campaign in Yemen, and he's right to do so. Last September, Obama was holding up the drone strikes in Yemen as a shining example of the worth of U.S. interventionism in other people's countries. We're going to go in and blow up people that we think maybe kind of sort of might be terrorists or not like us, and 20 to 30 innocent bystanders around them, and all will be well. And, of course, as you know, the U.S. puppet regime in Yemen has now collapsed, and Yemen is back in the hands of the Yemenites. And obviously the U.S. is going to be trying to gin up some reason to go in there as well. All right, we're going to grab ourselves another phone call here. G in West Virginia. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Mike. I'd just like to say you're doing a good job and keep it up.
Thank you.
My first question is, how would the unrest or regime change in Yemen, how would that affect Saudi Arabia? And my second question is, now that Russia's now doing currencies swaps or doing business with other currencies other than the U.S. dollars, how would that, wouldn't that benefit their economy? Because I know they got sanctions on them right now. And then you can just answer my question off there. Thanks a lot.
All right. Well, first of all, with regard to Yemen, that's a militarily important location because it controls access to the Red Sea through the Gulf of Aden. And that's why the United States needs to be in control, even by proxy, of that choke point. In terms of all of the various currencies that are out there, Saudi Arabia is constrained by the petrodollar deal to trade their oil only for U.S. dollars, but they're starting to strain at the leash, partly because of the loss of value of the U.S. dollar and the fact that Israel has demonstrated to the world that the United States cannot keep their half of the petrodollar deal, which is to protect the oil nations from Israeli aggression. So, because the U.S. economy is propped up by everybody needing to come and get dollars, that's the agenda behind this war, to take us all back to Bretton Woods and the petrodollar deal. Now, obviously, any nation that starts to trade in a diversity of currencies is going to be in a better position, if for no other reason than they're not dependent on one single currency to maintain its value and trust around the world. So at some point, I think Saudi Arabia may in fact start to trade their oil for currencies other than the dollar, although that will bring the wrath of the United States down upon them. And we're already seeing where apparently Figaro over in France has published the missing 23 papers from the 9/11 report that prove Saudi Arabia was ultimately behind 9/11, and that's, of course, complete nonsense. Saudi Arabia makes a huge amount of money off the petrodollar deal. They're making a huge amount of money over all their investments they have in the United States of America. They're not going to do anything that would allow the U.S. government to come in and seize the Saudi wealth that's parked inside the United States of America, let alone bring on a war. And if Saudi Arabia really got it into their head that they wanted to hurt the United States of America, all they got to do is ask for their money back. And it would crash the U.S. financial system, and it would be perfectly legal for Saudi Arabia to do that. So they're trying to blame Saudi Arabia for 9/11, just like they originally blamed Afghanistan to invade, Iraq to invade. Anybody they're going to invade, they may have had something to do with 9/11. And, of course, all of this is to keep attention off Israel, which really does seem to have been involved in 9/11. So it's a complicated issue. Let's see. It looks like he called back. G, are you still there?
Oh, no, thanks for answering my question.
Oh, okay. All right, we're going to let you go. All right, there we are. All righty. Now, down in Cuba, Raul Castro is taking a very guarded approach to all this talk about the White House plan to kind of normalize relations. And part of the issue is that the Cuban exiles in Florida are treating this as their potential return to power. Remember, when Castro kicked out the U.S. puppet Batista, Batista's remaining government bugged out to Florida. That's where the oldest and original of the Cuban exiles came from. And they've been wanting to get back into Cuba because they had a sweet deal down there. Led to the Bay of Pigs invasion. And they're treating this normalization of relations as an invitation for them to come back in, kick out Cuba's current government, and reestablish U.S. puppet rule. And Raul is not having anything to do with that. And he has stated repeatedly that he's open to normalizing relations with the United States as long as the United States does not interfere with Cuba's internal policies and principles, which seems very reasonable. But we're hearing this hue and cry of voices from down in Miami say, the good times are back. We're going to be going back in. It'll be donkey shows and casinos and all this other good stuff that was going on there. All righty, we're going to grab ourselves another phone call here. Mo in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. How you doing?
Doing fine.
Good. About 6 months ago, my daughter's in 7th grade, and they sent a letter home asking her opinion about having this book called Gray Line or something to do with the Holocaust. And I wasn't here to sign it, so she watched that. And I said, okay, that was about 6 months ago. Today she comes home and she's kind of sad. And what's the matter, honey? He says, I showed us this film about the Holocaust, and there was a survivor there and what they did to the Jewish people, Daddy. It's horrible. And I said, yeah, honey, that's true. But have you heard what the Israel's doing to the Palestinians? Who are they? Not that I haven't tried to tell her, but she's a typical 12-year-old. But I mean, I guess my thinking is, why don't the Palestinians approach these schools? I mean, and give their side of the view, or the other, the other side of it. I guess it's very frustrating to see them. Even though they did suffer through, and I'm not anti-Jewish, I'm just like you. I want to see a balanced view. And I'll just take your comments off the line if you care to come on it. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, well, Israel is definitely mounting a full-court press propaganda to try and get the Holocaust reestablished as an undeniable article of faith among the people. And in point of fact, we were reporting yesterday, there's actually a resolution in the House of Representatives right now that will criminalize questioning or doubt about the Holocaust. I mean, this is such an affront to the First Amendment. We now have a government that presumes to tell you what you will believe. And part of the problem is that time makes ancient truth uncouth, and a lot of the claims that were made at the end of World War II have fallen by the wayside under the gaze of science. Nobody's pushing the soap story anymore. DNA tests showed that not only did it not have much fat in there at all, because it was a wartime soap, it was pig fat in there, which is an embarrassment to all those cemeteries that buried bars of soap. The lampshades made out of human skin turned out to be goat skin. Ground-penetrating radar at Treblinka does not reveal the presence of any mass graves. And on and on and on and on. Now, there were slave labor camps in Nazi Germany, just like the prison labor factories we have here in the United States of America, and also Britain. And by the way, Britain is using their slave labor to make war materials, which is exactly the same thing the Nazis were doing. There were a lot of deaths in those German camps, primarily from typhus, which swept Germany toward the end of the war, and Germany's infrastructure began to fall apart. Or maybe it was a biological warfare exercise. We should look into that. Now, the reality is, at the end of World War II, the people who wanted to found Israel needed a major propaganda device, because the entire world had just united against Germany on the principle that one people does not have a right to go into somebody else's country and take it for their own use, and yet that is exactly what the founders of Israel wanted to do, go into Palestine and take it for themselves. And they needed a propaganda weapon that was so compelling and powerful that the same world that had sacrificed blood and treasure to stop the Nazis would shrug and say, yeah, I guess in this case it's okay. And that's how the slave labor camps became extermination centers, delousing became gassing. And it really is. And protecting this lie has become a full-time industry for a lot of Israel supporters. And now they're trying to get laws passed in this country saying you can't doubt it, you can't question it. Personally, I'm sick and tired of hearing about it because it all happened before I was born, and I'm in my 60s now. But this really is the face of the dictatorship, glaring at you for not believing as you are told to believe, whether it's the Holocaust or ISIS or human-caused global warming or vaccines are good for you. We'll be back after the news break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. John is still in our control room managing the phones. We got a caller waiting on the line I'm going to get to in just a minute. But Fox News is still going on and on about this Jordanian pilot. It's like nothing else is going on in the world except that, so I switched over to the science fiction channel, because at least their fantasies and make-believe are a little more entertaining than what we're getting out of Fox News. So we're going to go to the phones here. DJ in Atlanta, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael, thanks for taking the call, and great show as usual. I wanted to talk about this article that I read. It was talking about the investigator, the commissioner that was behind the investigation for the Charlie Hebdo killing.
Yes.
You know, the Frederick, his name was Fredu.
Yeah, the one who got really, really depressed in the middle of the most famous career case in his entire career, and all of a sudden he gets depressed and commits suicide.
Right, exactly, if we can all believe that. This article said that, it's on whatdoesitmean.com, by the way. I don't know if you've ever been there, but.
Yeah, I have. You have to be very careful of what comes out of there, because anything from this, guy who calls himself Saoirse Fall, you gotta be very careful about that.
Yeah, and I guess it was sourced somewhere else, but it was pretty interesting. It said he had, remember the getaway car that supposedly had all those documents that they found?
Yes.
Okay, well, one of the this guy who was doing the investigation, they said some of the documents had like cryptic, information on there. It had phone numbers. One of the phone numbers was linked to, it was CIA, it was linked to Petraeus himself, General. I don't know how he got tied up into all this, but they said basically that once he discovered that they were actually CIA implants, that he issued a arrest warrant immediately for President Obama and all these other, and other people to be named. And what happened was basically, within hours is when basically he got compromised within a few hours after that. And it's also one of the reasons why, Mr. Obama was not at the march, with all the presidents that were supposedly marching side by side and all that. And obviously for good reason, if he was implicated or someone in his staff was implicated behind the attack. Then
well, it's sorry to cut you off here. It sounds interesting. I'm going to ask you to send me the URL for that, and I'll take a look. We do know there were reports that this police officer, this investigator, had stumbled across information that contradicted the official story, and then he got suicided. And there was that other individual, Le Pen, who came out and said that the Charlie Hebdo attack was clearly a false flag by U.S. and Israeli interests, and his house burns down with him in it, and he barely escaped with his life. And so this is real brown shirt kind of tactics that we're seeing today, right now. Exactly the same sorts of thing that Hitler's brown shirts did to silence any questions or criticisms about what the Nazis were doing. So go ahead and send that to me, but if it's in any way linked to Sorsha Fall, we have to take it with a great deal of salt there. So thank you very much for the phone call. I'm going to let you go here and get on back to the news. Story out of Wake Up From Your Slumber. Greece under attack, which, yes, we understand that. Greece is refusing to play by the rules created by the private central bankers to loot the people of planet Earth for their own enrichment. And we're already seeing all of this nonsense coming out here. Times of Israel was saying the new Greek finance minister, he's an anti-Semite. Ooh, bad. You don't even want to talk. He's an anti-Semite. We can't do business with him. And a couple of days ago, they were saying Greece is the new hub of international terror. And we're going to start the egg timer here to see how long it is before they claim Greece was involved with 9/11. And Greece has a Death Star. And they're coming to get you unless we invade and put in a more banker-compliant government. Now, the new Greek parliament, which is led by Syriza, is adamant they will not ratify the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And without that ratification, this is going to go nowhere. Another reason for the European Union and the United States to not like the new government of Greece very much here. The Greek Prime Minister is out there saying that replacing this troika of these financial entities, IMF, World Bank, European Central Bank, is a mature and necessary development for Europe. And yes, everybody, every nation needs to break free of this fraud of private central banking. They're actually making strides toward that up in Canada. We'll be talking about that in a little bit. Needless to say, we're getting all these articles about how Osborne is out there saying Greece's Syriza government could pose greater risk to global economy than the Middle East conflict. What it poses a risk to is the hegemony of the private central bankers. They can't stand any country that is not involved in their scam because it sets an example other countries look at and say, wow, what they're doing works. Let's do that. That's why the European banking families were trying to destroy the early United States of America, bring them under the slavery of a private central bank, tried to assassinate a president, Andrew Jackson, literally launched a war, the War of 1812, as punishment for refusing to renew the charter of the First Bank of the United States of America. That's how these people play. Now, Greece made an interesting comment the other day about why they should be paying all this money to Europe and to Germany when Germany still owes them not only reparations from World War II, but money that the Greek government was forced to loan the Nazis during the occupation. That's still owed to Greece, along with accruing interest. And by now it's a huge chunk of change. And of course Europe's attitude is, we're not going to talk about that. Russia waded in, saying that it's time for Russia to reevaluate Germany's owed reparations to Russia for World War II damage, and that's estimated at 3.4 trillion, with a T, euros. Now, Russia's never going to see that money, but it does help underscore Greece's argument that everybody's screaming about money that Greece owes, but nobody wants to talk about the money that is in turn owed to Greece. It's kind of a little one-way thing. We demand you pay us what you owe us, and what we owe you. Now, the United States has slapped Venezuela with new sanctions. And President Maduro is out there saying Washington's trying to destabilize his country. Gee, you think? Been trying to do that ever since Chavez was in power. for daring to sell their oil for the yuan. And here's the funny part. State Department spokesperson Jen Psaki, who, by the way, she looks kind of zoned out these days. Look at her eyes. She's on some heavy medications, it looks like. And she's out there saying basically that these sanctions are for believed involvement in human rights abuses and acts of public corruption. Okay? Well, sanctions for human rights abuses and corruption, if that is really the issue, it's time to wall off all of Washington, D.C. Get some of those 20-foot-high concrete slabs from Israel, just wall off the entire Beltway and everything inside. And it underscores the hypocrisy of the United States, which has acknowledged torturing innocent people to death to find weapons of mass destruction that never existed, to lecture anybody else on human rights. So, we got to take another break for commercials, and we will be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And somebody finally sent me a link to the video of the Jordanian pilot being executed, and yeah, it does appear to be real. But we don't know who did this. Only who we're being told did it. And ISIS could be just as much of a manufactured front as Al-Qaeda was. Maybe they had to come up with ISIS because too many people realized Al-Qaeda was a fake. The U.S. government's official policy is if at first you don't succeed, lie again. And they're going to keep on doing it. In fact, they've brought out the bovine excrement howitzer, trying to get us all riled up for another war. And at this point, the American people are really tired of war. We've been at war with the whole world since 2003. And most of the people I talk to, their attitude is, look, I don't care what's going on in these other countries. That's their problem. We have things that need to be fixed here in the United States of America. So, now I'm looking at this other article. This is over at voicesofliberty.com. Leaked audio proves 2011 Libya war rationale was a fraud. Apparently, audio tapes have come out showing that members of Congress and the Pentagon were trying to prevent this intervention in Libya, which has absolutely destroyed the country. It's still in turmoil and on the verge of falling back into the hands of the Libyan people. It's another foreign policy whoopsie by the U.S. government, which is following its ideology and not really thinking very much about what they're doing. And it's turned into a disaster in Yemen, a quagmire in Iraq, quagmire in Afghanistan, and now Libya. So, and once again, they're out there pushing this whole thing about Saudi Arabia was behind 9/11. No, they weren't. If Saudi Arabia really wanted to hurt the United States of America, if they wanted to live without all the money they're making off their U.S. investments, all the money they're making off the petrodollar deal, all they got to do is ask for their money back. They don't need to run airplanes into a building. It certainly wasn't the Saudis who were cheering and clapping and dancing as the buildings came down. Anyway, all right. Speaking of Saudi Arabia, and this should be a red warning to the new government over there. Story over at Investment Watch blog. The new Saudi king is tied to Al-Qaeda, Bin Laden, and Islamic terrorism. So, yeah, Saudi Arabia is now on the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list, which was inevitable. And if the old king of Saudi Arabia thought that his good friends, the Bush family, would never turn on him, well, yeah. Remember, we were all buddy-buddy with Saddam Hussein until he sold his oil for the euros. Then we turned on him. Article out of Blacklisted News here. The golden age of black ops. In fiscal 2015, current year, U.S. Special Forces are already deployed to 105 nations. Last year, they were deployed to 133 countries. 70% of the nations on Earth have U.S. Special Forces on the ground, doing who knows what mischief. Most Americans don't realize this is going on. Most Americans don't realize how many military bases we have in other people's countries. Because after all, they've been told that those other countries only hate us for our freedoms. Netanyahu, apparently emboldened by recent polls in Israel that show his party pulling ahead in advance of the next elections, or being more successful at stealing the elections than the other guys, is out there with his bravado saying no one is immune to Israeli attacks. And he's out there campaigning on more defense spending, meaning taking the money from you, the American people, and giving to Israel for more defense spending. And Netanyahu is playing a game that we have seen played too many times before in history. When an incumbent is running for re-election against stiff opposition, get into a war, because historically voters are very reluctant to change a government in the middle of a war. Now, Israel made a big stink over at the United Nations regarding the leader of the UN Commission, which is investigating war crimes committed by Israel in Gaza. The inquiry's chief was forced to resign amid accusations from Israel that he was biased against Israel. Ooh, he's biased against us. He's not willing to take our word for what's going on over here. We only want somebody who loves Israel in charge of investigating Israeli war crimes. Well, the head of the inquiry stepped down to try and defuse the crisis. Now Israel is pushing even harder, saying, well, now that this whole thing's been discredited, the UN needs to scrap the entire probe. It's already discredited. It was under the control of somebody who doesn't love Israel. Now, it's because of this that Israel's much carefully manufactured propaganda image in the world is starting to collapse. And there was an interesting story. This is out of Desert Peace. There was a survey taken in Great Britain that showed Israel is now one of the most unfavorable countries in the world. In fact, the only country that scored worse than them was North Korea, which tells us that the propaganda campaign against North Korea is working, and the propaganda campaign for Israel is not. But it's seen as one of the world's most negatively viewed countries, and as long as the United States continues to be their butt boy, the U.S. will be seen in a negative light. Now, Rudy Giuliani has come out saying that Benjamin Netanyahu has a right to speak before Congress on Iran. Now, my response to that is, then I, an American citizen, which Netanyahu is not, have an equal right to speak before Congress about non-existent Iraqi and Iranian nuclear threats, non-existent Spanish mines in Havana Harbor, non-existent torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, existent weapons on board the Lusitania, and every other lie used to trick the American people into war. No, Rudy, Netanyahu does not have a right to speak before Congress. He's not even an American citizen. And Boehner is in violation of the Logan Act for going around the White House to invite Netanyahu in. We're in the middle of a litmus test. We can see who's working for Israel and who's working for the United States of America in this argument. And we can't afford to have any politicians who view Israel's needs as a priority over the needs of the United States of America. We need leaders who will put America first, second, and third. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're getting some headlines coming in from Russia and Ukraine. Earlier we were talking about this rather large Maidan-style crowd that has surrounded Poroshenko's presidential palace in Kiev, something they don't want you thinking about, which is why we're getting all Jordanian all the time. And the spin that was already being put on it is that, oh, these are the Ukrainian people demanding further action against the eastern Ukrainian republics. Well, the truth is coming out. This is a protest by the Western Ukrainians against the fourth mobilization. And since Poroshenko announced this new round of conscription, drafting, less than half the people are showing up when being called out in the towns and villages. The local governments are tearing down the signs calling for the new draft. They've had it. They've had enough of this war, and it looks like Poroshenko may be out. And, of course, the U.S. will go in to protect him because he's a legitimate government there. And remember when the U.S. was overthrowing Ukraine's legitimate government a year ago? And Obama has now admitted the U.S. was part of that. Back then they said, oh, we can't interfere. This is democracy in action. Absolutely. Well, now there's some real democracy getting ready to kick the U.S. puppet out. And I'm sure that the U.S., we have to go in and support them. We have to send in more weapons and crush those Ukrainian people into accepting the politician we want. Now, apparently, we've been talking about this 7,000 or 8,000 Kiev forces that were nearly surrounded and cut off over at Debaltsevo. And apparently, as of right now, they are completely, totally surrounded. And the Rada deputy is saying the National Guard has basically fled. And the militia has fully encircled Debaltsevo. The road to Artemovsk is under Novorossiya control. And, of course, the U.S. is saying, it's all Putin's fault. Russia's invaded. Russia's invaded. Well, can't see it. I'm sure Jan Psaki will come out and say, no. Putin made a deal with the Romulans, and he got Romulan cloaking devices for all of his tanks and artillery, and that's why we can't see them as they're invading Russia. They may just be desperate enough to do something like that here. Anyway, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, Representative Christopher Smith, Republican of New Jersey, has introduced House Resolution 57 that condemns all forms of anti-Semitic abuse going throughout the world, whether committed by governments or persons or groups, and specifically focuses on denying or minimizing the Holocaust and other crimes of Nazi Germany. And, of course, it's got bipartisan support. This bill flies right in the face of the First Amendment. And the Bill of Rights is an absolute. You either have those rights or you don't. And a right is something that the government recognizes. It doesn't give it to you. Because if a government can take away a right, then it was never a right. It's merely a privilege given by a master to a particularly obedient slave. And that's where we are right now. And I hold that when the government is not in compliance with the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, it is no longer a legal or legitimate government. It can't be. That Constitution is the original contract with America, drawn up by the people to shackle the government and hold it down, to serve the people and the nation. Because the Founding Fathers understood the curse of political power is it attracts the very people who should never have it. And they tried to design a governmental system that was going to keep the ambitions of powerful individuals subordinate to the national good. We were talking about Stephen Saleta the other day. There's another story just like that. Apparently, over at the Church of England, there's a vicar, Reverend Stephen Sizer, who on his own time, on his own social media, posted a link to the article 9/11 Israel Did It. And the Church of England said they're going to investigate the incident. They're not investigating whether Israel had anything to do with 9/11. But they're knuckling under to the Zionist lobby in Great Britain. And they're scared right now. They've maintained this official illusion of World War II and Israel's history for over 60 years, and it's starting to crumble before their eyes. And they're out there just anything to silence the doubters, the question, including laws that are anathema to basic human rights of freedom of speech and inquiry and thought. And it is a sign of how afraid they are. I mean, because, if somebody's running around saying they saw a Bigfoot, they're not thrown in jail. Somebody says they were taken up for a ride in a flying saucer. Their career isn't wrecked. Nobody pays attention. More than anything else, it is the extreme measures taken against anybody who even starts to ask any questions about the official story that tells you something is being hidden. Now, we all know we were lied to about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. We were lied to about torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mines, Lusitania not carrying weapons, and on and on and on and on. Prudence demands that we view everything we have ever been told or taught in the state-controlled schools or the corporate media with suspicion and skepticism. Skepticism is a healthy function of the human mind. And they're trying to outlaw it. Now, as you know, the United Nations, claiming a lack of funding, has ended their humanitarian relief in Gaza. Whether they really ran out of money or they were knuckling under to pressure from Israel, we don't really know. But Iran has stepped in. An Iranian charity is in Gaza distributing food and other assistance to the people of Gaza. And I'm sure Israel will be screaming, oh, they're in there trying to cause mischief. No, they're in there trying to take care of the people. All right, so let's talk about the economy here. Story out of Global Economic Analysis. Debt of 6 Eurozone countries exceeds 100% of their gross domestic product. 2 more will cross that threshold this year, France and Spain. Now, the Maastricht Treaty, which established the euro, had provisions in it to keep sound fiscal policies. Debt is supposed to be limited to 60% of the GDP, with annual deficits no greater than 3% of the GDP. Every single country in the Eurozone, including Germany, is in violation of those requirements of the treaty. Because the bankers didn't want to live by the rules. More debt means more profit for them. Maybe one of the reasons why Obama's coming out with a new record, almost $4 trillion budget for the U.S. Oh, we'll borrow more. The bankers will love it. Debt is profit for them. Russia's buying, again, a record amount of gold. They spent over $6 billion U.S. last year purchasing gold, which does 2 things. It gets them the gold, and it allows them to get rid of the dollars. They're moving away from dependency on the dollar. They don't want it in their foreign exchange reserves anymore. And it tells us that Russia's economy has not been harmed by this oil price war or sanctions, or they wouldn't have this kind of money to spend on the gold. And in fact, there's an article over at Investment Watch blog, Russian oil and gas companies will withstand low oil prices. This according to Fitch. And Gazprom got the highest investment grade from China's new ratings agency. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about the world economy and some very unpleasant realities out there. Now, recently the United States has tried to weaponize global commerce by means of sanctions, the oil price war, and threatening to cut disobedient nations out of the SWIFT electronic banking system. And like so many other policy decisions, it wasn't thought all the way through, because it has simply encouraged these other nations to set up their own parallel systems, which are now operating. And Gazprom is apparently in negotiations with the Chinese banks for long-term loans to continue to develop and produce oil. So, Australian dollar dives to 5.5-year low after interest rate cut. Gold that's priced in the Australian dollar, needless to say, is soaring. It's the thing about a currency war, you can't just surrender and say, I give up, let's go back to status quo ante. Article out of Investment Watch blog, worst start in 76 years for the S&P 500. Now, obviously, yesterday and today, things were looking really good on the stock market, and it doesn't make any sense. The financial corporate media will say, oh, it's because there are negotiations in Greece, or this, or oil prices started back up again. But the PPT is out there doing what they're doing, and everybody who's still in the market understands it's being rigged, and they're trying to basically say, yeah, we'll go along with it as long as you guarantee to keep the market up so we make money. But it doesn't really make any sense. With all of these retail outlets closing stores, half their stores, all their stores, massive layoffs at eBay and PayPal now, everybody missing their earnings projections. It doesn't make sense for the American stock market to be doing well at all, unless it's being rigged for financial shenanigans inside, and certainly for political reasons for the U.S. government, which is still out there claiming we only have a 5.6% unemployment rate in a nation with better than 93 million Americans willing and able to work who cannot find a job. Now, remember when Standard & Poor's dared to lower the credit rating of the United States government and were immediately sued by the U.S. government? No retaliation there, I'm sure. Well, apparently the lawsuit has been settled, and S&P has been let off with a minor wrist slap for daring to question the good faith and credit of the U.S. government. And as soon as the case was settled, just hours after this suit was being settled, Standard & Poor's took a big red marker out on the European banks. Downgrades went to Credit Suisse, Barclays, Lloyds, Bank of Scotland, RBS, HSBC, and Ulster Bank. Meanwhile, Raiffeisen Central Bank, M-Bank, Unicredit, Commerce Bank, and Deutsche Bank were all put on watch negative. I think S&P has learned how to play ball with Washington, D.C. here. Now, here's a very interesting article over at the Daily Bell. When it comes to the bull market, keep your eye on the money printing, not the regulation. And it starts out by talking about regulation, about how recent bills by the U.S. Congress have pretty much destroyed the Dodd-Frank Act, which was one of the few big accomplishments of the Obama administration during those 2 years when Democrats controlled Congress. And now under constant lobbying and caving in and Republican pressure, all those protections are being taken away. And if you take away all the protections and you do not penalize Wall Street for committing fraud, guess what you're going to get? More fraud. U.S. December factory orders fall 3.4%. Ex-transport drops 2.3%. As that caller pointed out, the Baltic Dry Index is continuing to go down. These are all major indicators. We may be back in a recession. The government won't admit it. Right now, U.S. consumer spending is the weakest it's been since 2009. And this is going from December's numbers at the height of the holiday shopping season. And the reality is U.S. consumer spending in December hit the lowest level since 2009, which is when everybody was struggling to get out of the aftermath of the implosion of the mortgage-backed security fraud. Right now, 47% of U.S. households, according to a federal government survey, 47% of all U.S. households say they're spending all of their income just to pay their bills, and they're having to go deeper into debt or dip into their savings just to keep the bills paid. That's not a healthy economy. And obviously, if everybody is that tight, then of course they're not going to have money to go down to the retail stores, the shopping malls, and buy new things. They can't. They can't afford it. Here we are. Now, here's a bizarre story, again from Investment Watch Block. Americans are now considered a threat to the power grid because we have been cutting back on our use of electricity. Remember when we were told that conservation was a good thing? Get rid of your Edison-style bulbs, get compact fluorescents or LED bulbs. Save electricity, and everyone did. Went solar. And now the power companies are saying that their revenues have plunged so much, they're now in trouble because they can't make their payments to the money junkie banks. And now they want to raise rates. And we keep seeing this, charging you more to sell you less. It's the new American business model. We went through that here in Hawaii. Everybody was cutting back and conserving, and HECO said, we got to raise rates or we're going to go broke. Same thing with the water bill. It's amazing here. Now, a lot of people are talking about this recent court case up in Canada and what it really means. And it comes down to the fact that Canada's central bank is rather unique in that it too is under the control of Canada's government. It was nationalized back in, I forget exactly what year it was. But here's the point. This lawsuit is asking the question of why the central bank issues all the Canadian currency as a loan at interest, as opposed to simply issuing it to buy what the government needs, flow through commerce without accruing interest, and tax back in the same amount to close the cycle and balance the books. Same system the United States started with. And the reason you're not going to hear anything about this lawsuit is the court just ruled that, under the laws under which Canada has this central bank, yes, they're allowed to loan at interest to businesses, but control of the currency is supposed to be managed interest-free. And if this case is not derailed or overturned, it's going to have enormous implications because other countries around the world are going to start saying exactly the same thing. Why does a government that has the authority to create and issue a debt-free currency, a public currency handled as a public utility, persist in borrowing currency at interest from a privately owned central bank? That's the problem we have here in the United States of America. And it's all just ink and paper or numbers in a computer. There's nothing really of value tied to that currency. It's just created out of thin air, loaned to everybody at interest. And that's not the way this country was started. And in the new Congress, we're going to be coming up on that whole debate about raising the government's borrowing ceiling. We don't need to. The Constitution says the government can create its own interest-free money. Why are they not doing that? Well, because they're getting a piece of the action from all the trillions the Federal Reserve is stealing from you with this little scam. But the world is waking up to what's been going on with these private central banks for the last 300 years. And it's high time. Because those private central banks, they are the common enemy of all mankind. And it is a system of enslavement to artificially create debt, convince you that that debt is a real thing, that you are required to work to try and pay off, even though under the private central bank system, you can never pay it off because the debt is always bigger than the available money supply. We'll be back after the top of the hour news break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645 here. Now, yesterday we were reporting on Radio Shack, which had previously announced they were going to close half of their stores, the underperforming stores, and as part of their bankruptcy, we're going to sell the rest to Sprint. Well, there's a new wrinkle. Amazon has stepped in, saying they want to buy the surviving Radio Shack stores. And I guess Amazon is now thinking about a retail presence, but there's now going to be a bidding war between Sprint and Amazon, and that's going to be good for the owners of Radio Shack here. Now, here's a very bizarre story. This is over at Fortune, and it ties in with all this hoo-ha about human-caused global warming. And the article is how Wall Street got snowed on weather derivatives. Okay? Now, derivatives, talk about the giant open-air gambling casino. They're betting on everything, including the weather. And apparently the Chicago Mercantile Exchange listed dozens of contracts based on snowfall in numerous cities that could be traded like stocks. And were supposed to rise and fall daily based on the weather forecast, which have not been too accurate thanks to Al Gore and his minions. And a number of large Wall Street firms got into the market. Now they've gotten out. Didn't work out because the expected long-term prognostications of the climatologists haven't worked. But the point of this story is weather derivatives. It really is a giant open-air gambling casino. They're going to bet on anything they can justify creating a derivative on. It's absurd. It's totally out of control. It's totally out of control. Now, United Parcel Service, apparently, along with the shopping malls, did not do as well as they'd hoped this past holiday shopping season. And apparently they don't have enough revenue to keep on going, and they are now going to apply surcharges to residential packages. In other words, they're going to go on going from business to business at their current rates, but if you are sending from or receiving to a residential address, they're going to hit you with an extra charge because it's costing them a lot to go around house to house and drop these packages off. And they're blaming it on the disappointing holiday season. Reminds me of that line from Fiddler on the Roof. So if you had a bad week, why should I suffer? Same thing here. All right, story coming out of Washington Times. The House has voted to repeal and replace Obamacare. The vote broke along party lines, and they're already being warned that there will be an attempted filibuster in the Senate, and even if it passes there, Obama is going to veto it, and they don't have a veto-proof majority. The part that worries me is when they talk about repealing Obamacare and then replacing it with something. And they're out there screaming about, oh, the plight of the uninsured, nobody's taking... Well, I want to hear about what they're going to do for the plight of those who bought those Obamacare-compliant policies and still got screwed by the high deductibles. That's a big part of the Obamacare story, where people lost their affordable insurance. They were forced to buy much more expensive insurance that turned out to be no good. That's the big scandal. And I'm all in favor of repealing Obamacare, but when they start saying replacing it, oh boy, do I start worrying. What have they got up their sleeve now? Because Obamacare didn't work for its overt purpose of making health care affordable to Americans, and certainly for its covert purpose of finding another way to loot money from the American people. So they got to come up with something new, because everybody's digging in their heels against the carbon tax, aided by this brutally cold winter. We're going to be talking about that. Last week we were talking about how Comcast, which seems to have a very unfortunate attitude toward their customers, and if you try and call in and cancel your service, you are directed to a retention officer who will find some way to keep you signed up for the service or simply throw enough roadblocks in your way to keep you online. And there was this story about how this gentleman who tried to cancel his service, his next bill arrived with his first name changed to Sphincter. And again, I'm using the polite word as opposed to what they really said. Comcast has now apologized to this customer, and what has happened, this has triggered a flood of mails from other customers of Comcast who say their bills are arriving with names like whore, dummy. Boy, whatever happened to customer service where the customer is always right? I mean, for Comcast to be treating their customer base like this is a good reason to oppose that merger with Time Warner. We're getting into a state here where the corporations are so large they feel they can openly be disdainful of the customers. You don't have any choice. You have to buy our service, so we can just slap you around any way that we want here. Now, apparently, in the case against Dish Network for telemarketing violations, the judge has basically said, yes, Dish Network did commit 57.5 million telemarketing violations, calling people who were on the Do Not Call registry. Now, the potential maximum fine for these amounts to $920 billion, because the maximum fine for violating the Do Not Call list is $16,000 per instance. Now, we all know what's going to happen. Dish Network will be given a greatly reduced fine. And it basically underscores the fact that that Do Not Call list really isn't being enforced all that well. We're on it. We're on it here. We still get calls from telemarketers. And I'll tell you one of the most annoying things they do is they just dial the number on their automated system at the same time they're checking the Do Not Call list. And if your number comes up, then they hang up. But by that time, the phone has rung. And you're dashing across the room, grabbing your phone, wondering who was calling you, and it's a dead line. Now, over in St. Louis, in the aftermath of the Ferguson riots, there's been a huge public outcry that there needs to be some kind of civilian oversight on the police force to keep them under control, to limit all this brutality and abuse and murder taking place. And the St. Louis police are digging in on the other side. They are threatening to quit if the civilian oversight measure passes. And I think that betrays a rather bad attitude on the part of the police, where they're opposed to citizen oversight of how they treat the citizens. Amazing stuff here. Now, you've probably been seeing all over the news about this catastrophic measles outbreak that's taking place all across America. And the cases are numbering in the hundreds, not exactly a wildfire epidemic. And what they're doing, this is a push to get you to buy more product from the vaccine makers. And they're getting very heavy-handed about this because they know there's a growing public awareness that a lot of these vaccines don't really work, and some of them are actually harmful. But they don't really care. They just want your money. Apparently over at CNBC, they were interviewing Rand Paul and asking him very misleading questions on the subject of vaccines. And Rand Paul, to his credit, I don't agree with everything he says, but he stood up and said, there is an issue here that has to be dealt with as to whether these vaccines really do work and if they're really safe. Because remember, under one of the provisions of the Homeland Security Act, you cannot sue a vaccine maker for harm their products cause you, which has led to all kinds of reckless behavior on the part of the vaccine makers. Got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Well, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm just looking at an email saying, smile for the camera. There you are. All righty. Now, we're talking about vaccines. We're talking about a growing public awareness that the latest offerings from the pharmaceutical corporations really may not be trustworthy. They may not do what we're told they're going to do. And it's become the new business model. They don't want to just make medicines for sick people. There aren't enough of them. So they're going to make their fortune selling medicine to people who don't really need it. It really is the modern incarnation of the traveling Wild West medicine show. Con artist would drive his brightly painted wagon into the middle of town, crank down the backstage. There'd be a little bit of a show, and then the pitchman would come out and say, out there on the other side of the Great Plains is a plague laying waste to the Native American populations, and it's on its way here. And the only way that you will save yourself and your loved ones from this scourge of the American West is a bottle of Dr. Mike's, what's it? He'd sell a bunch of bottles of basically water and pepper oil and anything else he found out there on the desert. Take his money and skedaddle. The people in the town would drink the medicine or whatever it was. And as long as they didn't get sick and died, they'd be happy. They'd think they were protected against this non-existent disease. And this was a staple of the Wild West, and it has come back. We're now seeing more indications of a government that is taking the attitude that if you will not buy what is being offered, if you don't want to buy it, we will make you. And there's an article over at Natural News. Medical mafia calling for gunpoint quarantines of citizens who refuse their vaccinations. And it has to do with the measles outbreak at Disneyland. And they want to order a quarantine for her, but she doesn't have the disease. They weren't even ordering this kind of quarantine when the Ebola was an issue here. Now, I want you all to remember something about measles. If you are my age, or even younger, and you've had the measles, you don't need a vaccine. You're not going to get it again. That's always important to keep in mind. Now, another story coming out of Global Research up in Canada. And they're reporting on this government study. Reveals that if you get a vaccination, you not only have a chance of becoming infected with measles, possibly more than if you avoided the vaccination, by virtue of having the vaccine in your body, you can spread measles to others. which is good business for the medical establishment, not so good for people. Another article coming out of 12160 talking about how over on Fox News, they're pushing the agenda. The state should be able to force parents into giving their kids any shots the government or the pharmaceutical industries want to sell them. And they're out there saying some things require Big Brother. Well, I grew up in a much more innocent age where corporations would make a product, and if you liked it and you wanted it, you would buy it. But America doesn't make products people actually want anymore. So we force them to buy them, force them to buy headsets for their cell phones and Obamacare-compliant policies and pushing these shots. And if there wasn't this large body of research about the harm caused by these medications and the lack of efficacy, there wouldn't be a debate. If vaccines demonstrably worked, we'd all line up for them. But they're junk. And they don't want to spend the time and money to actually make them work and make them safe, so they just get the government to force you to buy it. Now, over at VacTruth.com, there is another story documenting yet another case of a 4-month-old baby boy who got his mandated 4-month vaccines and died 3 days later. Now, at the time, it was attributed to sudden infant death syndrome, which is one of those made-up illnesses that is just convenient to have. There's no known cause of SIDS. It just happens. It was sudden infant death syndrome. We're sorry you lost your kid here. Now, the pathologist who ruled sudden infant death syndrome had not been told that this baby had had the 4-month vaccinations just 3 days before, and has now come out and said, had he known that, he would have said the vaccines were the likely cause of death. Now, over at Natural News, and we've talked about this story before, but I want to hit it one more time. Apparently, over in Italy, a court looking into harm caused by vaccines managed to obtain a document from GlaxoSmithKline, which proves that they knew that when certain vaccines are given together in combination, it can cause sudden deaths. But they just decided that wasn't worth sharing with anybody, and they sat on it for a lot of years. And any time a baby died after getting the vaccines, sudden infant death syndrome. Or the other one, shaken baby syndrome. That's another made-up condition to protect the pharmaceutical companies from lawsuits by dropping the blame for the death of the child onto the grieving parents. And some parents have been sent to jail on the assumption that they somehow caused the death of their own baby. Now then, I want to bring up another story here. INFOWARS.com. Obama criminally opens border for flood of illegals. Yes. Now, measles was officially declared eradicated in the United States all the way back in 2000. And as late as 2008, there were no cases in the United States. Today, it's a different story. And I'm not the only one who's making this connection between the open border immigration policy and all these illnesses that are breaking out all over the country. Over at Breitbart, they're pointing out that the illegal immigrants brought the measles into the country. And the reason we know this is true, if you look at the maps, and I've got them on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, of the eruption of measles, it appears all over the country at the same time. There's no single point of infection like somebody coming into Disneyland. It pops up, and it pops up in the areas the illegal amnestied immigrants are being sent to. You just think about that one for a while. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're going to go ahead and take this phone call before I get on to the next story. So, Dustin in New Jersey, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike.
Hey, problem, reaction, solution with the measles, huh? You can bring all these illegals in to boost up the economy, and then you can give them low-wage workers to the corporations, and then if some of them have measles, then you can give the pharmaceutical companies more excuse to, got to sell those vaccines.
Yeah, everybody's, looking at the situation in terms of how to make themselves a little bit richer. But again, while I have nothing against making money, there has to be a balance of priorities as to what is best for the nation and its people, and that aspect seems to be gone completely from Washington, D.C.'s thinking.
Yeah, it just seems like it's everybody for themselves and this greed and everybody else.
Very, very, very much so. And ultimately, of course, everybody's driven into this maniacal quest for ink and paper by the people at the top, the private central bank, who just build up more and more and more debt until everybody is struggling and compromising their ethics and morality just to pay next month's installment on the debt load. And again, the debt can never truly be paid off because the debt is always exceeding the available money supply under that private central bank model.
Hey, Mike, switching gears, do you have any new information on the new Silk Road that's forming with the Chinese and the Indians and the Russians?
Yeah, they're putting it together. They're investing a huge amount of money, putting it together, China, Russia, and India. And it's being seen as heading off efforts by the United States to sit astride the trade between those countries, the way they have pretty much everywhere else. And so it's yet another blow against dollar dominance in the world. And for one thing, Russia, China have not only the technology, but the money to build a modern transportation system, whereas the U.S. just doesn't anymore. They're doing everything they can on the cheap, and it's all falling apart. And it's another reason why the world is turning away from the United States of America. It goes all the way back to that wonderful speech on HBO's The Newsroom. America is not the greatest nation on earth anymore. We used to be. It got sold for a fast buck.
All right, thanks a lot, Mike.
All right, we're going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call here. Now, there's another story here that I wanted to call attention to, and this is over at KXI.com. Mystery of the virus paralyzing children in the U.S. Rare bug related to polio may have caused more than 100 unexplained cases. And the story goes on that more than 100 children and young adults in the U.S. and one child in France have had to be hospitalized with unexplained weakness and paralysis in their limbs. They've got a fancy name for it, acute flaccid paralysis. It's been going on since September of last year. And they're basically admitting these are the symptoms of polio, but it can't be polio because polio has been eradicated. Well, they were saying that about measles back in 2008. Some of those immigrants bring polio back into the country, maybe, or this could be another vaccine accident because most of the modern vaccines are using what are called attenuated pathogens. They'll take the disease-causing organism, they'll slap it around to weaken it, mix it with a bunch of the adjuvants, which are designed to provoke an immune response, and they'll shoot it into your arm. And it's supposed to create a mild set of the symptoms so that your body develops immunity, which sounds good in theory, but these attenuated pathogen vaccines have a bad habit of reverting to full potency once they're administered, and the oral polio vaccine is known to be one of those. So, anyway. And a lot of people are starting to say all of these illnesses that we thought were gone in the United States, and they're all back at the same time. All these illegals are pouring in, granted amnesty, shipped off to other parts of the country. What possibly justifies this kind of act by the federal government? If a foreign government sent diseased individuals into our heartland, it would be called an act of biological warfare. Now, here's an interesting little article over at rawstory.com about 8 invented diseases Big Pharma is banking on. Now, we've been talking about how the psychiatry scam has been creating names of conditions that are all based on normal human behaviors, declaring them diseases and prescribing a medication for them. But apparently, Big Pharma is doing the same thing, and they're coming up with these diseases which are just created out of thin air. remember, the guy who came up with ADHD, shortly before he passed away, he admitted it's a fictitious disease. We made it up to sell product with. And they're talking about the magic three of drug sales: fear, forever, and faith. You're taking a medicine, you don't know if it's working, you don't even know if you need it, but you're afraid if you stop, something bad will happen, because that's what the advertising tells you. And apparently some of the invented conditions that have been created to sell medications include SERM deficiency. And it's basically to sell biphosphonates like Boniva and Fosamax to fight osteoporosis. And now they're finding out that it actually encourages it. Leads to jawbone death, esophageal cancer, and causing the fractures it's supposed to prevent. Now they're coming out with selective estrogen reception modulators. And they cause a lot of harm here. Statin deficiency. They're pushing that one. And remember, statins have come under severe criticism for actually causing more problems than they supposedly solve. Circadian dysrhythmia is another one they came up with. Adult autism, ADHD, refusal to play nice have been declared to be diseases requiring medication. And, of course, this one you've seen all over the TV set. Low T. You're suffering from low T. Are you feeling tired? Is your hair falling out? Your skin wrinkling? Yeah, it's called old age. Do you need reading glasses, dental implants, and heel splints? You're not getting old. You have low T. Basically what they're doing is this is repackaging hormone replacement therapy for women for men. And if you talk to anybody who's been undergoing hormone replacement therapy, you find out it's got a lot of bad side effects. And it's all about selling product to make money. And if it causes harm in a small number of people, well, they'll just pay off the lawsuits if they're required to pay lawsuits, which vaccine makers are not. And they're still making profits here. It is amazing when you step back and think about it, the scale of the lies we are told. We literally are living in a real-life matrix of crafted illusion to keep us obedient, productive slaves. And I think that's the reason the Matrix trilogy really took off, is I think people watched it and understood on some level it was a metaphor for the current world. We watch our little TV screens and think we understand the real world. And we don't. That TV screen, that is the Matrix, along with the corporate newspapers and magazines and so forth. Which brings us to human-caused global warming. Let's see, Investment Watch Blog. Another dose of frigid Arctic air for the East will make for a brutally cold Friday. Another story out here, USA Today. Snowstorm with a flash freeze chaser. NPR. Potent winter storm breaks records as it moves northeast. Los Angeles Times. Frigid Boston plows away record snowfall for the Super Bowl parade. They had to delay it 24 hours. Now it turns out a lot of the team members are already heading out for vacations, and they're going to miss the parade on that one. And it's not just the United States. One of the big carbon-Nazi arguments we get is, all right, it's cold in the U.S., but trust us, the rest of the world is just warm and toasty. No, it isn't. More about that when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program. Today we're talking about human-caused global warming. And one of the arguments you always get from the carbon-Nazis, every time you point out how you're buried under snow and ice, they say, well, it may be cold where you are, but trust us, everywhere else is warm and toasty. No, it isn't. Over in Japan, up in Hokkaido, they've had to activate the military to dig a town out from 6 feet of snow. Completely buried and paralyzed. They're having to send soldiers in there to help them try and clear it away and get the streets open again here. Over in Sweden, the town of Luleå had a record-breaking 113 centimeters of snow, breaking the record set 50 years ago. And the carbon-Nazis come back and say, well, it's winter. Of course there's going to be snow. And that's not what you were saying back in 2000. You were saying human-caused global warming meant no more snow and ice. It was in all the newspapers, all over the corporate media, the horror of never having a white Christmas again. Doesn't matter how much snow and ice we're getting. That we're getting it at all undermines everything that was being said by the global warming cult. Over in Great Britain, London is looking at snow and ice. They're calling it the big freeze coming in. Apparently the gridding teams are out there trying to keep the motorways open there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about fracking. It's kind of faded from the news because the fracking industry has felt the pain of the oil price war even more than other segments of the petroleum industry because the fracking industry has already been on thin margins. They're not actually able to deliver the volume of oil and gas they thought they were going to. They're having to revise downward how much oil and gas they're going to get out of these shale formations. They've had to downgrade the Monterey Shale formation out there in California by 90%. Overall across the entire nation down by 1/3. And all their economic forecasting was based on those earlier estimates. And they're just getting by there. Now, a new survey released by the Department of Energy and Climate Change over in Britain is showing public support for fracking has slumped to an all-time low. It's down to 24%. Less than a quarter. People are seeing all the horror stories about methane in the tap water, toxic fracking chemicals getting into lakes and streams and ponds. And here is something we've been talking about, and this is a confirmation coming out of Sputnik News. Out in California, where we're being told there is a record drought, including San Francisco, California state regulators allowed oil companies to inject fracking wastewater into aquifers that held water reserved for drinking and irrigation. And now that water cannot be used, or should not be used, for human consumption or irrigating crops, because those chemicals will get in there. But if a corporation wants to do it, it must be good. I remember when Claire and I first moved out here to Hawaii, all we heard constantly was drought, 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 conserve, conserve, conserve. And as it turned out, there wasn't really a drought. There was adequate rainfall, but the state government was reserving the lion's share of the available water to the agricultural corporations. And as agriculture declined, and land that used to have pineapple fields was turned into condo developments, the water crisis just sort of went away. But that absolutely is criminal. There's screaming drought in California, and California state regulators allowed the fracking industry to toxify available aquifers that had drinkable, usable water in it. That's criminally negligent. And I'm sure they're out there saying, oh, don't worry, the aquifers will filter it out. It's going to be just fine. Well, why are they pumping it in there anyway? Why don't they find someplace else to dump it? Well, it would cost too much to lay the pipes. If you're going to frack, and setting aside the fact that more and more of these fracking areas are now experiencing earthquakes, where they have no prior history of seismicity, frack with fresh water. If there's a leakage, it's not a problem anymore. I mean, there's still the problem of methane coming up and destroying the oxygen in lakes and ponds and streams and killing all the fish off. But these fracking fluids are very dangerous, toxic, carcinogenic, in some cases radioactive chemicals. And as we had that former fracking worker call into the show, the fracking companies are making deals with other corporations to get rid of their toxic waste that they can't get rid of anywhere else. Oh, we'll just pump it 1,000 feet down into the ground. Don't worry, it'll never come up. And it is coming up. It is coming up. We have gone so far down this road of greed above all. And it is amazing that the very same people who are out there screaming that our plastic bags are threatening planet Earth, they won't look at the fracking industry. Methane is far more potent as a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide is. And it's pouring out of the cracks in the pipes and the cracks in the ground. Don't see Al Gore screaming about that. Now, I do like nature, and I support the wise use of natural resources. And we should conserve, and we should protect and manage the earth because we've only got one. But most of what we're being told we should do to be good for planet Earth is what's really good for some other corporation or somebody's money-making scam, like carbon credits and carbon taxes. And meanwhile, those aspects of our civilization that are truly posing a risk to Earth and its environment, fracking, reckless disregard for nuclear safety, war, they never seem to get on the radar of the so-called environmental movement. Had that guy from Greenpeace the other day saying, anybody who denies human-caused global warming ought to be beheaded. All right. How about all the people who are pouring all this toxic chemicals into our drinking water? Isn't that a threat to the environment? I'm beginning to think Greenpeace was another front group for some intelligence agency to sick on corporations they didn't like. Oh, you're harming the whales, you're harming the baby seals. Go away and make way for our cronies company to come in and take your market from you. Apparently, over at the FCC, they are not planning on releasing their proposed net neutrality order before the vote actually happens. And we ought to be concerned because prior to working at the FCC, Wheeler, who's in charge of all of this, worked as a venture capitalist and lobbyist for the cable and wireless industry. And we're already getting the Orwellian speak on this. Obama's out there saying the Internet should be more heavily regulated to ensure it stays open and independent. Right out of George Orwell, War is Peace. Ignorance is strength. Freedom is slavery. Warming is cooling. Censorship is free speech. Anyway. Another group of hackers out there with ransomware that changes the encryption keys on your encrypted data. Isn't it amazing that all of these NSA people can't find any of these cyber criminals? We're supposed to trust them that they're spying on all of us to protect us from crime and terror, and yet they don't actually seem to do it, do they? Obviously, these hackers can evade the NSA. What if the hackers align with ISIS? We're doomed. Now, if you use adware blocking software, and a lot of people do, a lot of people are using AdBlock, and there's a new scandal coming out of there because apparently AdBlock is charging Google a fee to not block Google's ads. Amazing. All right, there's the music. Claire and I have to head on out of here and get some things done. We'll be back tomorrow, Wednesday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. Our guest tomorrow is going to be Carl Cohen. So until tomorrow, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, stay angry, make good choices. Tell all your friends about whatreallyhappened.com. We need a larger audience. We need your support. And aloha, America.